before COVID-19, you might have been dating or you might have been starting to date, and suddenly we're thrown into this situation where we're thinking, is it safe to date? Should we date? Do we need to put off dating? And that can be really challenging because we know, the situation with lockdowns happening across the world, it can have a real impact on our mental and emotional health. And if we do isolate ourselves fully, that can be very traumatic and very distressing for lots of us. And when we're alone, when we really want to have someone special in our life, if we feel we have to put that off indefinitely because we don't know how soon this is going to go away, that can really have a massive impact on us.
Absolutely. So, what we would encourage you to do is to reach out to people. That's really important. So isolation is one of the worst impacts of this whole COVID situation, that people feel like they're not being looked after, they're not cared for, nobody's interested in them. So what we would encourage you when it comes to dating is to continue with dating, but to kind of almost take it as an opportunity to slow down the whole process of dating. That's one of the advantages of this scenario, because you can't necessarily meet up regularly. We might be in lockdowns, or there might be rules around meeting up with someone who's not part of your bubble. But it's an opportunity to get to know someone in a very different way, not by meeting up in a restaurant, for example, or in a coffee shop, meeting up online and taking the time to get to know this other person in a very different way.
Yeah.
In a slower way, so to speak, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Because up over the last sort of 10 or 15 years, there's been more and more of a rise of dating apps. It's become easier and easier to meet people. And sometimes that's actually results in the fact that, we often kind of dismiss people quite quickly based on maybe how they look or maybe some superficial things. And, now when we think, because of the situation at the moment, when we think about swiping right, it might be more swiping right with an antiseptic wipe rather than swiping right with the finger on an app. Because it's become a little bit more challenging, and that does open up different opportunities. And I think in some ways it's something that where we can, like Angela said, we can slow down, step back, and actually start to get to know the other person more deeply. Like in the old days when, people would actually write each other letters and get to know each other through letters even.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so we slow it down, we start to get to know them and thinking about what you want in a relationship. And often we say, we think we know what we want, or we say, I want somebody who is, intelligent, somebody who's kind. And then we start looking on the dating apps and we suddenly see, they've got nice kind of shoulders, or they've got a nice face, and suddenly, the other stuff goes out the window.
That becomes more important, right? Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and so it's stepping back and actually thinking, really, what is it that we want? And when you start to chat to them, and not just chatting with messages, but, it's really important to do the video calls, get to know them. And that also lets you know they're a real person as well. So that's it. Yeah, that's important. And thinking about what it is you really want and taking the time to think, does this person have those qualities? And sometimes, with dating apps and everything, it's all too easy in the past that we meet somebody, we kind of really kind of get attracted to them, and we get physically involved with them, maybe kind of more quickly than we would have in the past before the rise of lots of the kind of dating apps. And sometimes as soon as we get physically involved, it's like our body releases different chemicals into the brain, which actually distort our thinking.
Yeah, the brain shuts down, right? Yeah. We're just horny. That's it. We're driven then by our hormones. And that's it. So we're not really seeing the person in front of us then a lot of the time. Yeah. Which is part of this problem as well, isn't it? When you get too carried away too quickly with someone, you just often do that because you have this idea in your head about who they might be as a person without really knowing who they are. So you have these sort of fantasies in your head about that they are, brilliant, a brilliant person, they're really clever, they're really smart, they're really successful, whatever it is that floats your boat, right? So you have these ideas, but often when you then really get to know the other person, you realize, well, actually that was my idea, but that's not really quite true. That's not the person I'm actually getting to know here. They're quite different. They're quite separate from what I want them to be.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, bearing that in mind, as I said, you want to be clear about what it is that you really want, and not just this, not the superficial things, because those are things that are fleeting. Like Angela said, we get caught up in a moment, and we start to think the person is something that maybe they're not. But start to think about a little deeper about the person's values, about kind of some of the deeper qualities that in a long-term partnership are the things that are going to really matter. And, as well as part of that, it's probably important as well to be really clear early on in what you want from the relationship. So maybe even in a profile or when you start speaking with the person quite soon. And sometimes we hold back because we kind of think, well, if I say what I want, maybe it's going to scare the other person off.
Absolutely.
But now, we're not in a situation where things are going to rush anyway. This is a chance to actually think, what do you want? Express that. And, when you find somebody else who is secure inside themselves, they're not going to be frightened away. This is going to be, and these are the sorts of people that we probably want to be involved with in a long-term partnership anyway.
Yes.
So being clear about that and expressing that even quite early on, just in a kind of relaxed way, not in a kind of like overly kind of, I have to have this, and kind of, if we say it in a stressed out way, it might frighten the other person off. But being quite calm about it, just being clear, this is what I'm looking for. I'm looking for a long-term relationship.
Yeah, and really less thinking about, I want someone who's 6 foot tall, who's got broad shoulders, or I want someone who's got long blonde hair. So these are the sort of qualities that, well, okay, that's kind of, it's nice to have that maybe, and you might find yourself very attracted to someone with these qualities. But think more along the lines of what it is that you need. What is it that makes me feel good as a person? Yeah. So what is it that I respond well to? So think along those lines of what makes me feel good is, and then write down the qualities that are right for you in a partner.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's a really powerful thing. Like I said, when you're writing your profile, you might even kind of make some of those things clear, or just be aware in your mind when you're talking to them, does this person fit into some of those criteria? And, that's a great thing as we're talking to someone quite a lot more before we maybe even meet them, we start to assess that. Yeah.
So do they want the same thing in life? Do they have the same visions of a joint life, for example, in terms of what you might want to do together? For example, if you're really a very avid traveler, you're a curious person, wants to travel around the world, get to know places, etc. Do you have someone in front of you who is willing to do that with you, or are they more sort of like a stick in the mud, stay at home kind of person, who likes their home comfort and is not going to do that with you? Or of course, the really big issue always is around children. Particularly if you are of that age where this is relevant to you, to start thinking about whether you want to have children or family. Clarify from the outset whether you are in front of someone here who shares the same vision as you do. So either does want to have children, doesn't want to have children. So get some sense of, is this someone who has a similar idea about sharing life together, creating a life together?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, you might be thinking, well, how do you find that out? And it's really just ask them, and maybe kind of write out some questions that you can ask. And, and when we're talking about some of these things, it's not that, we're saying from the outset, it's not that the first time you speak to them, as soon as they come online and are on video, we're saying like, so do you want to have children?
Yes,
it might be,
sure.
Yeah, so it's like... Yeah, talking about it first, but fairly early on, and before you meet them, before you do get involved physically. Whereas as we talked about, when you're getting physically involved, suddenly the brain goes into this kind of distorted state, and we lose track of some of those things that are really important to us. So it's saying, asking the person, so do you like traveling? Where have you been in the past? And we get a sense of that, or. So like, how, asking a person about, even talking about some relationships in the past can be okay, and just assessing, has that person been in long-term relationships before? Do they seem to have just been, if they're talking to you and it seems like they've just been lots of very short-term relationships, it may be that person struggles with commitment. So there may be some cues that we start to get and kind of get familiar with and understand before we meet that person, which, sometimes when we rush into something, it can end up in one of us getting heartbroken, or kind of, just not finding what we want, or even losing hope over time.
Absolutely. And also, finally, I think it's kind of really important to remember that when you first meet someone, you tend to overemphasize what you have in common. You tend to over-focus on the similarities. For example, focusing on the movies that you both like, or focusing on music that you share, or books you read, or something like that. And then you think, oh wow, we both like the same thing. We must be on the same level here. Yeah, we must be, this must be the right partner for me because we share the same taste. Well, so this is kind of true on some level, but really in the long run, this is not enough to sustain you as a couple. And these kind of factors are not in the long run that important. Also because you, as I say, you focus in particular on hearing similarities while not really listening to the differences that might be there between both of you.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a really important point. And we're going to be finishing off this episode quite soon. Just one little thing I wanted to add, which not quite the same thing, but just a little practical tip in the current situation is you're thinking about, well, there is going to be a time where you maybe do want to meet them. And although there may be restrictions in place, like I think in most countries, there are some advice, the government gives advice that you can form bubbles. So it might be that you can meet somebody. But I think what's really important is before you do meet somebody for the first time, whether it's in a restaurant or a park, think about just a few practical things that you both feel comfortable with, because when they're not said, sometimes the other person doesn't feel comfortable, and we both want to feel comfortable. So it might be little things like, will we keep a social distance? Will we kind of wear a mask? And even thinking like, well, where can we meet that we both feel safe traveling to? Yeah. So if you're not comfortable taking public transport, is there somewhere else you can travel to and meet where you both feel comfortable? Because the more comfortable you feel when you're actually on that date, the better that date is going to go.
Absolutely. Great. I think we've sort of come to the end for this podcast now, haven't we?
Yeah, so absolutely. And like I said, during these episodes, we're going to be exploring more about the mind, body, and relationships. And with relationships, as we talked a lot about relationships today, whether you're interested in improving the relationship that you're in, or whether you're single and want to find and create a really fulfilling relationship, these are things that we cover in a lot of depth on our online course, therelationshipmaze.com.
Yeah, so we're looking at issues that are relevant to single people who are looking for a date or looking for a long-term partner, as well as couples who are in relationship, and the kind of issues that are relevant, the sort of struggles and challenges that they might experience when in relationship.
Great, so have a great week, stay safe, and we look forward to speaking to you again soon.
Bye for now.